We've got a wonderful policy session today, and we've actually been able to get these speakers committed also with the help of the Rocky Mountain Mineral Law Foundation. I want to thank Lisa Kirchner and Ben Mocklis here that are great lawyers here in Salt Lake City that helped us to reach out to the folks that are going to be presenting to us today. Because we're running a little bit behind schedule and because you'd much rather hear the salient information that our presenters have instead of me reading bios, I'm just going to introduce the run of show that we have for this technical session and then hand it over to our presenters. So first we're going to hear from Katie Sweeney, who's the Executive Vice President and General Counsel of the National Mining Association. And then we're going to hear from Kevin Lewis, who is the President and Principal Air Quality Engineer at Air Sciences Incorporated. And then we'll hear again from Mike Nasi, who's a partner in environmental and energy law at Jackson Walker LLP. And then finally from Ron Rimelman, who's the VP of Environment, Health, Safety, and Sustainability at NOVAGOLD. And after everyone has presented, we'll have an opportunity to take some questions for all of our panelists from those of you that are watching. So now, without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Katie Sweeney.
Great. Good morning, everybody. And thanks, Brian, for the invitation to participate in this breakout session. I really look forward to a time when we can all meet in person and hope that this week's promising news on vaccines means that that time will be sooner than we expected. These are definitely interesting times, and despite some lingering political and litigation wrangling, I think it's widely expected that Joe Biden is our next president. And while I have some bona fide Utah roots, as my dad grew up there and my grandfather had timber businesses in Vernal and near Park City, I did grow up in Wilmington, Delaware, which is usually not much of a claim to fame, but now I will be able to say that the man who was my high school graduation speaker, Joe Biden, ultimately became president of the United States. With that, I won't waste any more of my 12 minutes, and I'm here to give you a top line on what I think we can expect out of the Biden administration regarding public policies that may impact mining. With that, next slide, please. I cannot tell from my view whether the next slide is up, but I'm going to presume that it is and just keep going. So hopefully you all can see. And on this slide is just a map of public lands. I know you all and many Westerners appreciate the importance of public lands, including the resources and recreation opportunities they provide. But many others across the nation, including members of Congress, don't make those connections or understand the multiple use mandates that govern the Bureau of Land Management and the Forest Services and their management of public lands. I will say, though, the COVID pandemic has been a wake-up call to at least some on the importance of secure supply chains of raw materials, including minerals and those needed for energy. The federal lands are an important source of our mineral wealth. Federal lands account for as much as 86% of the land area in certain Western states, and these same states account for about 75% of our nation's minerals and metal production. They supply everything from gold to copper to uranium and coal. So national policy affecting the availability and use of public lands has significant implications for whether or not these important resources are developed. And over time, policies have come into play that have restricted or banned new mining operations on more than half of all federally owned public lands. Next slide, please. So public lands was not a significant campaign platform for Biden, and so not a lot of specifics were provided. But generally, his campaign positions appear to track those of the Obama administration, particularly increasing opportunities for renewable energy production on public lands as part of his overall emission reduction plans. Much was made during the campaign of potential Biden moratoriums on fracking or fossil fuel production. And as you are probably aware, Biden wavered a bit, but ultimately seemed to endorse a moratorium on oil and gas production on public lands. Certainly, those more to the left in Congress and many NGO groups are pushing for that. But interestingly, oil and gas are getting far more attention in this regard than is coal. This could be due to the NGOs thinking that they've had great success already in dethroning coal. And so now they've shifted their attention more to oil and gas, but we will still have to be watchful for the inclusion of coal in any public land moratorium on fossil fuel production. And just for those that have been watching this play out, the National Mining Association is still engaged in the litigation that the NGOs brought challenging the Trump administration's lifting of the Obama administration's coal leasing moratorium. So that litigation is the zombie litigation that will never die, and it remains ongoing to this day. Next slide, please. So getting to the day one pledges related to public lands. Some of Biden's so-called day one pledges directly impact Utah. He has indicated that he will immediately reverse the Trump administration's reduction in the acreages of the Bear Ears and Grand Staircase Escalante monuments. Recall the Bears Ear Monument was established by Obama and Grand Staircase by Clinton. Trump was the first president to reduce an existing monument, which many claimed exceeded his legal authority. And while there's little doubt that Biden will act to undo Trump's reductions, the timing may be less than immediate for a couple of reasons. To ensure the durability of his efforts, Biden may choose to first seek a formal opinion from either the Solicitor General or the Office of Legal Counsel at the Justice Department for a determination on whether Trump's reductions were legal. Or he may decide to wait for a decision from the DC District Court, Obama-appointed judge who is currently weighing arguments in challenges targeting both of the Utah sites, and arguments and responses in both cases were completed as of early June. So we expect a decision in those cases probably in the next couple months. One other item that Obama has said he will do on day one is an executive order regarding the 30 by 30 initiative. So that's an initiative to preserve nearly a third of the world's land and water by 2030. For those of you who aren't familiar with that, the 30 by 30 plan is a goal of the United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity, and 64 countries' political leaders have pledged to support it. It's gained a lot of momentum, both in South Carolina and Hawaii. Legislation on the 30 by 30 has been introduced, and recently the governor of California signed an executive order to protect 30% of California's land and coastal waters by 2030. Interestingly, 2 members of Congress reportedly under consideration for the next Secretary of Interior, Senator Tom Udall and Representative Deb Haaland, both from New Mexico, have introduced companion resolutions expressing congressional support for the concept. Next slide, please. So the Biden campaign announced its new priorities once Biden was kind of declared the winner of the election. So his 4 big priorities are now COVID-19, economic recovery, racial equity, and climate change. For the interests of the mining industry, I think it's important to note that in particular, the economic and climate priorities require secure supplies of domestic minerals, metals, and other raw materials. He has a lot of goals that will increase the use of these materials. And I think that's one area where there is alignment between the Biden administration and the mining industry, because we are here to provide those materials. For example, under the economic recovery, he is looking at far-reaching investments in the auto industry, everything from parts and materials to EV charging stations. On the building side, he's looking at upgrades to 4 million buildings and 1.5 million sustainable homes. On the innovation angle, he's looking at critical clean energy technologies, battery storage. So there's just a lot in there where you can see that we will need to rely on our own sources of materials. Again, COVID has really opened some eyes about supply chain security, and I think this is something where we can work with the new administration to achieve some of these goals by supplying those raw materials. The one specific mention of mining comes in the economic recovery, where he talks about conservation jobs, including those that will be needed for reclaiming coal, hard rock, and uranium mines. Next slide, please. So turning to who might be the next Secretary of Interior, there have been a lot of names put out there. But advisors say that Biden wants to build the most diverse cabinet in history as part of his goal is serving as a transitional figure in an increasingly diverse Democratic Party and country. So let's just do a little bit of a rundown on who's on the list. We have Senator Tom Udall from New Mexico, who will be retiring from the Senate at the end of this Congress and looking to do something new. His father led the Interior Department under Presidents Kennedy and Johnson. He is an outspoken proponent of renewable energy development on federal lands. We have Rahul Grijalva, who's serving in the U.S. House of Representatives from Arizona. He's the current chairman of the House Natural Resources Committee. He is a proponent of withdrawing lands from new mining operations, and he also is a major proponent of punitive mining law reform. We have Representative Deb Haaland, also from New Mexico. She is a freshman member, but she is one of the first Native women to represent her state in Congress. She's quickly risen to prominence. She co-sponsored the Progressive Energy Framework that's become kind of the bellwether for the progressive bona fides on energy, the Green New Deal. We also have Governor Lujan Grisham of New Mexico. So a lot of New Mexicans under consideration here. She used to be in the House. One name that I haven't heard that much, but he's popped up on a couple of lists is Fran Ulmer. He was appointed by President Obama to serve on the BP Deepwater Horizon Commission. Senator Heinrich is on a lot of people's lists. He's the junior senator from New Mexico. He is an avid outdoorsman. He's been very outspoken on environment and public land issues. He has called for a national outdoor recreation plan and a modern vision for public land management that's rooted in conservation. Also have heard that former Governor Steve Bullock of Montana might be under consideration now that he lost his Senate race, and potentially another one not pictured here, but who may be under consideration for this or a number of other jobs within the administration is Washington Governor Jay Inslee. Just note that it takes a long time for anybody to get confirmed. The timeframes have jumped significantly since the days of Ronald Reagan, and some of the statistics are on the slide. It's particularly difficult to get all the sub-cabinet roles filled. So if you look at under the Trump administration, a lot of these have never gotten filled. We still are missing directors of Bureau of Land Management, Park Service, Office of Surface Reclamation and Enforcement. So I wouldn't hold my breath that anybody would be getting quickly through the Senate confirmation process. But here, those are some of the folks that might be. Next slide, please. Turning to who might be the next Secretary of Agriculture. For those of you who aren't aware, the reason agriculture matters is because they oversee the Forest Service. The key political person at in the Ag Department is the Undersecretary for Natural Resources and Environment. They oversee the Forest Service. The head of the forest chief, is always a career federal employee. That is not a political appointee. So you could kind of say that Forest Service is a stepchild of agriculture, and mining is a stepchild of the Forest Service, because not that as much mining occurs on Forest Service lands as does on BLM lands, but it's still 20%, so it does matter. Under consideration here are Heidi Heitkamp, who was a US Senator from North Dakota, the first woman to serve in that state. She might be opposed by NGOs because of her support for Keystone XL, but she's still pret's popular. Others on the list are Marcia Fudge, who is a congresswoman from Ohio. She's said to be the favorite of the Congressional Black Caucus and Progressive Democrats. And then we have Lieutenant Governor David Zuckerman, who's Lieutenant Governor of Vermont. So we shall see what happens with the Forest Service on that, and the Department of Agriculture. And then next and final slide, please. So just wanted to talk a little bit about Biden and mining law and Biden's recognition of the importance of mining. And on this slide, and I know there's a lot of words here, but I think it's pretty interesting to look at where Biden was in 1995, when there was a bill sent to the president for President Clinton for signature that would have made some reforms to the mining law that were supported by the industry. And he had a lot of interesting things to say, saying it was a giveaway of billions of taxpayers' dollars. He called the 1872 mining law anachronistic, giveaways to foreign-owned lands, a ripoff. The net effect of the law, he said, was simple. Foreign mining companies get the gold and American taxpayers get the shaft. So that's kind of scary rhetoric, but that is from 1995. And if you look at a recent article from Reuters, they talked to several folks within the Biden campaign and talked about various conversations that the campaign had with U.S. miners across the country. And they talked a lot about how the Biden administration would support boosting domestic production of metals. They realized that they're needed for electric vehicles, solar panels, and other products crucial to his climate plan. He also, expressed support for bipartisan efforts that have been going on this last Congress in recognition of the supply chain problems from COVID and the fact that China really has a monopoly on a lot of our mineral production and processing, and that Biden actually agrees with the broad intent of the Trump administration's orders to encourage domestic mining. So I do think that there are some opportunities for us to work with the Biden administration on public lands now that there is that recognition of how much minerals are needed to achieve his goals. I don't want to overtake my time, so I'm going to end there, but we'll be on the watch for litigation positions that the Biden administration might take, and whether or not they'll still, I doubt they'll defend the NEPA regulations, but those are things that also could impact public lands that we'll be watching.
Okay. Thank you to Katie, and we'll now hand it over to Kevin.
Hello, everybody. Let me, so Brian, I still need to be, the host needs to allow for sharing. If you go under participants, you can, there should be a screen sharing option. Actually, if you take your, let's see if that did it. No. under at the bottom of the screen, you see it says 3 participants. I think if you click on that arrow, there you go.
Hey. Sorry.
It's yeah, it's still, so Liz, at the bottom of the Zoom screen where it says 3 participants, I think under that menu option there's a allow, something to allow screen sharing. Oh, look at that. All right. So I'm going to share this screen here. So are we ready, Brian? Okay. Hello, everybody. I'm Kevin Lewis. I work for Air Sciences, and my experience has been primarily in the air permitting, air quality analysis for the mining industry for the last 25 years. Copper, gold, vanadium, lithium, potash, phosphate, limestone, lime manufacturing. That's what I've been doing for pretty much 24/7. Real quick about who Air Sciences is. We're an air quality consulting firm, and it's a lot of people ask this question, so I'll just volunteer the answer. We just do outdoor air. Small business, 20 scientists and engineers, and our specialty is air permitting, EIS, air impact analyses for mining. So I've broken this presentation up into, what happened with the Trump administration for the last 4 years that affects air quality and air quality regulations, and how does that compare to previous administrations, and then guessing at where things may be going with the Biden administration. The not too exciting part of this is that for the last 25 years, as I've watched administrations come and go and air quality policies change, for what we do on the ground, getting air permits from state and local agencies, dealing with the federal land manager, whether that be the BLM or the Corps or the U.S. Forest Service, trying to get a record of decision for a mining project. A whole lot has not changed. There have been some changes, but really at the end of the day, it hasn't really speeded up or slowed down the process or added more hurdles to the process. So that's kind of big picture. But let me go through these. I only have 6 or 5 slides, so this will go pretty quick. Under the Trump administration, there were 26 rule reversals that had to do with air pollution, outdoor air pollution. Now I've listed some of the categories here, some of the highlights. Automobile, fuel economy and emissions. Again, not a lot to do with mining. Coal plant mercury regulations, greenhouse gas emission regulations have been rolled back. There was an interesting oil and gas methane rule that was rolled back. This next one, once in, always in policy. That's a little more interesting. That has to do with the Clean Air Act amendments of 1990. If you were a major source of HAP emissions, hazardous air pollutants, then you were subject to regulation called maximum achievable control technology. And even if you got your emissions below the level that triggered that regulation, you were always in. And that's now been reversed. And so you may have gotten into that, and now you can get out of it. I'll talk more about that later. Probably the most significant one in my mind is how the Trump admission has set a higher bar for new greenhouse gas rules, and also the withdrawal from the Paris Climate Agreement. But again, as far as mining air regulations, nothing direct or too specific. Now, the Biden administration, I mean, this is all pretty self-evident. We'll immediately get back reinstated into the Paris Climate Agreement. Possible new greenhouse gas rules be coming down the pipeline, and also possibly a reversal of the once in, always in policy. Now, we talked about the once in, always in policy, but most of I'd say over 90% of the mining projects that I've worked on are not major sources for HAPs, so that's just not as exciting. The greenhouse gas rules will probably be something that could have an impact for, again, those folks like myself that are trying to get an air permit for a mine or trying to get through a NEPA process and the air quality regulations. So this slide is really what myself and my team has experienced on the ground for doing this air permitting for mining. During the Bush administration, there was the PSD actuals to projected actuals, as we call it. And the PSD rule, which came out the act was in 1977, the rules came out a bit later. But that is one that if you have a mining operation that's a major stationary source, again, this is not the majority of the mining operations that I've dealt with, but if you did, you would be subject to this pretty stringent regulation that requires best achievable control technologies on all your emissions. Before Bush, the rules were written in a way that they really sucked you in. If you're an existing source and you're doing the smallest modification, you could get sucked into it. What the Bush administration did was say, look, we're effectively only going to suck those projects in that actually are showing a real increase in emissions of a significant amount. So that was a game changer. The other, for the folks in my field, the other big game changer was during the Obama administration when the greenhouse gas tailoring rule came out. And this was, again, a rule that said, if you have a source that produces greenhouse gases, that was a way to get sucked into this PSD program, or often called new source review. But of course, that was overturned by the Supreme Court. So it was a game changer for a short amount of period. Now, in the last 4 years under the Trump administration, I mean, honestly, from an air perspective, now I realize from many other perspectives, this just isn't true, but nothing substantive has happened that has really affected the timing and the ability for air sciences and other companies to secure these air permits and these NEPA records of decision. So really moving forward, I think the low-hanging fruit for people that want to slow down issuance of mining permits, from air quality permits, that is probably going to be this greenhouse gas rule. This is a sticky wicket. There's a tremendous amount of diesel fuel that has to be burned to move these haul trucks to move all this material. So I'll be interested to see what happens on that. But I will say, and maybe this is just because I've been doing this for too long, I've watched the administrations come and go, and I'm surprised how much it impacts the other environmental disciplines. And for some reason, it just hasn't been a major impact from one administration to the next on air quality, obtaining air quality permits and records of decisions. Be that as it may, in the next 4 years, we really ought to keep our eyes on how greenhouse gas may affect projects moving forward. And that is the end of my slide. I guess Liz or Brian, we were gonna do questions at the end, so I can be done now, or I can entertain questions. How do you want to do this? In the meantime, I'll stop sharing my screen.
Yeah, we're gonna do questions at the end, if that's okay with everyone.
Very good. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you. Now we're going to go out of order a little bit. We've got a presentation from Ron Rimelman that actually had to be pre-recorded because of a scheduling conflict. So I'm going to let's see. And Kevin, could you give up the hosting? Or here, Liz is coming to save me here. So.
Well, I did unshare. So, the host, switch the host. Okay, let me see if I can do that.
Yeah.
Reclaim host.
Did you do it for me, Liz?
Yep.
Yeah, I don't see the option on my screen.
Wait, where's the screen share and do that?
Appreciate the opportunity to do this presentation. There is a lot going on under the Clean Water Act, particularly as the Trump administration over the past year has been working very hard to finalize a number of actions. It seems to always happen that way towards the end of the presidential term. So we're going to go through some of those very quickly. Clean Water Act, particularly as the Trump administration over the past year has been working very hard to finalize a number of actions. It seems to always happen that way towards the end of the presidential term. So we're going to go through some of those very quickly, maybe some of the implications associated with it, and then talk about a few general themes. So first and foremost, for the Trump administration, their highest priority when they came into office was the waters of the U.S. rulemaking that had created so much controversy within the Obama administration. It is rather indicative that it took them almost the entire first term to put a new rule in place. Tells you how hard these issues are. The new rule was promulgated this year and does have some very potentially significant benefits to our industry. The two issues on the left-hand side, particularly this issue of not including within the definition of waters of the U.S. dry washes and ephemeral streams, could really significantly reduce the permitting burden for a lot of our operations in the southwestern United States. And then this issue of isolated wetlands, that to be a water of the U.S., a wetland has to actually be tied to a jurisdictional water. You know, obviously, like everything, this thing has gotten litigated. There are at least a half dozen cases that have been filed by the NGOs in a number of the blue states. I think the biggest thing about this that from an implementation perspective is it really changed the whole framework for how WOTUSs are defined by adopting this flow criteria concept. Great idea and very difficult to actually implement, particularly at the district level in the core. So a lot of potential benefits, but clearly the next step is to help those core districts figure out how to actually implement the program. And it's going to be very new for them. Also of significance here is that the 2020 rule reaffirmed the waste treatment exclusion, which is particularly important to mining because a lot of our waste management units that are in streams are allowed to exist by that exemption, that exclusion. You know, what's going to happen next? If we get a Biden administration, I suspect we will go back through this repeal and replace process again. We'll see how the court decisions might influence this also. Particularly the South Carolina case is a one where the waste treatment exclusion has specifically been raised. It's likely to be a long and complex issue. I guess my message to folks is, again, work closely with your core districts as well as, you know, particularly if Biden wins, to take a very conservative approach moving forward. Next thing, you know, in the past, you know, in April, we had a Supreme Court decision. We had a very potentially dangerous case out of the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals that could have significantly expanded the applicability in the MPDS program to groundwater discharges. Rightfully, the court took a, you know, position that what the NGOs were asking for was unreasonable, but it did create this new concept of a functional equivalency test. We've been trying to push the Trump administration to provide some guidance there. We still haven't got it, but it's a new concept. And it's one, again, you know, how does this get interpreted? Does the Ninth Circuit do it? Does EPA do it? And it's going to be an area where the states are likely to struggle. So, you know, I think this is one that certainly there are other, you know, there are a lot of potential groundwater discharges out there, but it's one that we're going to have to be very careful watching for, particularly if we see the Biden administration come in place and adopt maybe a more rigorous interpretation of what that functional equivalency means. I put in this slide because, you know, it's going to get to a later point I'm making on messaging. This is something we've consistently seen from our opponents, that things like the WOTUS rule and the groundwater case, that they've just gutted the Clean Water Act. The reality is that's not true in so many ways, but it is a message that's out there in the media and on social websites. Another one that's been active in the past year is the Trump administration has essentially reissued issued a rule that very much narrows the Clean Water Act Section 401 certification process. This is where states basically have to where there's a federal action, have to essentially certify that they meet the state water quality standards. Some blue states in particular were using this to essentially apply a very broad definition to stop federal projects or federal actions. A particular interest are things that involve fossil fuel and climate change. Again, it's another one where it's already being litigated at this point. If we do see a Biden administration, I think there will be substantial work to kind of undo this at this point. Again, one to watch as it moves through the courts and if there's a change in administrations. Again, similar headline that was out there when this rule was promulgated. A couple other key issues that are out there. There's the Trump administration still working to finalize. We have the Corps that's working to reissue their 404 general permits, a very important tool for folks and how they, particularly small scale activities, as well as trying to create more flexibility for compensatory mitigation. The stormwater multi-sector general permit, again, we expect that to be finalized. That actually is more rigorous than what's in place. There was an NGO case settlement that kind of pushed them in a direction. But I think we've worked hard as an industry to try to make it as least onerous on our industry as possible. And then I think the other thing that's out there, with the Biden administration, I think it's certain if it happens, we're going to see definitely an increased emphasis on environmental justice. It's a major part of this platform. EPA largely serves in a role of oversight of state and core programs. This, I think, could very easily be a tool where certain opponents and other folks can approach those populations where EPA could take that oversight role and essentially step into permitting actions, compliance actions, water quality standards actions. So it's something we're going to have to be very careful with. And also one that if we do see Biden come into place, building those relationships and continuing to build up with those types of populations will continue to be extremely important. One other one on water quality standards. Again, there's been a lot of work done on the Trump administration, some good work on aluminum and selenium, complicated issues. If we do see a Biden administration, this 2015 standards rule created a lot of new authority for states and EPA to effectively come in over the top of the states who really are responsible for implementing their water quality standards programs. So another one to watch moving forward. Just a few general themes. I think a message here is, yes, we've seen, I think, some good changes to Clean Water Act programs. As we've discussed, though, they're complicated both from a regulatory and technical perspective. There's a lot of uncertainties or decisions to be made. I think a lot of those decisions are going to be made at the local and project level. So I think it's going to still be very incumbent on us to work with local core districts, state agencies, to help them figure out how they can implement these programs in a legally sound manner. I still believe we as modern mining companies have a really good story to tell on protecting water quality and aquatic resources. Continue to emphasize the science side. Our opponents are very good at saying we don't protect aquatic resources. I think that's one we should continue to work on in terms of our messaging to counter that. And again, I think this is another place where Good Samaritan opportunities, where the Clean Water Act is really kind of a key cog in that machine, is something that will help us in that area too. And as I mentioned before, if Biden wins, this issue of environmental justice is going to be a very significant one, and really, I think, is going to be very incumbent of us to continue to reach out to certain populations and make sure that we counter a lot of the messaging our opponents are likely to put out there.
in light of the fact that the programs under the Clean Water Act are largely delegated to the states, it seems that the role of the states and staff at the states, environmental scientists in the states, it's paramount. And one thing I've noticed and wondered if you had similar experience is whether the transition among state staff people implementing the programs has had a material effect on the way they've perceived the mining industry and implemented the programs relative to the mining industry. For example, there's been huge turnover with folks that have been around for 20 plus years retiring and moving on, and now getting relative neophytes in to address the issues that are important to mining and implementing the act.
I don't necessarily think it's so much of a perception of the industry changing that differently. I think, as we talked about in the presentation, the complexity of the issues, well, we've lost a lot at the state agencies and frankly at a lot of government agencies, is the expertise and knowledge and experience. And as we talk about these programs that get even more complicated, like flow-based implementation of WOTUS, or that's really a core district issue, but the same thing's there, or new water quality standards or functional equivalency. The folks in the state agencies, which are really the ones tasked with water quality protection, really need a lot of help working through some of these things and how they should be implemented, how they should communicate and deal with those issues with the public. So what's
Okay. Now we'll be pleased to hear from Mike Nasi. And thank you guys for sticking with us as we've tried to switch between live and recorded and Zoom. We appreciate your patience. So we'll get Mike's presentation up here. Okay, go ahead.
Well, hey, great to be back. Let me just tell you, for anybody who thinks that doing remote virtual webcasting makes it easier on association management, I can tell you, being here, watching this awesome team running around to make this happen, it's pretty impressive. So don't think they're not working hard for you. What is all I can say. So we have limited time, and I'm not going to, I mean, the slides are going to be available. Brian will have them to distribute to folks. There's a lot of data here and a lot more to say about each of these topics. But in the spirit of keeping everybody interested, heading into the lunch hour ultimately, I wanted to make sure to touch upon a couple of the market issues that are out there in terms of electricity. That's a big part of what I do in my day-to-day practice. And then I'm going to transition that back to the education campaign, which I teed up in the general session. In that session, I talked about communication about environmental and regulatory issues. And we also have a significant amount of work product at Life Powered on the web and resources for you to use to help folks better understand electricity markets. Because just as dangerous as not appreciating how much progress the U.S. has made in terms of environmental achievements is also a misconception or misunderstanding about electric power market realities. So with that, first just a kind of a news event that was a big deal in July and then basically faded into the background as wildfires took over the headlines. What happened in California this summer is an extraordinary cautionary tale for the entire nation, but certainly the West and Utah in particular, because of what it tells us about where we're going. And this would be true regardless of who wins the presidential election, but it becomes increasingly more important for people to understand these risks if we have an aggressive decarbonization campaign coming out of DC. So what happened in California, a lot of folks that would like people to forget about the rolling blackouts in California chalked it up to historically high demand. Well, I'm here to tell you, and this graphic on this slide shows you that's just not true. 2020 was a strong demand year, but it wasn't nearly the highest power demands that California has had, even in the last 15 or 10 years. So you see historic high demands were much higher than what was experienced. So what caused it was really just a significant underperformance by a continually growing intermittent renewable fleet. And I'm an all of the above guy. I'm involved in the development of all manner of energy projects, but it is critically important for folks to understand there are physical limitations to how much we can penetrate an electricity grid with renewables without seeing these kinds of problems. And the unique thing about California and its relationship, especially to the Mountain West, is that it is greatly dependent upon out-of-state imports for these times of desperate need, and yet it actually, by its own policies, has all but prohibited or made illegal the importation when they're not in emergency conditions from fossil energy producers, whether that be coal or gas. So pretty big problem, and outages have significant consequences. I won't go into it because of our limited time, but lots of bad things happen in California, and they could get worse, and certainly kind of miss the headlines because of the taking over of the wildfires in the headlines. But really important quotes were made by public officials. Obviously, Democratic Governor Newsom acknowledging, very plainly that renewable energy was a major culprit in the problem and that they needed to take a harder look. They needed to sober up, was the term he used, about the reliability impacts of continued renewable growth. So many things were said, many actions were hopefully put in motion. Hopefully we'll see follow-up on that. But one more slide on the California situation, just to kind of understand how different the world looks between, say, the spring and the summer. What this graph shows you is the blue bars are basically where the power needs were served during the spring, which is a particularly temperate time and lower energy demand. And you see very little utilization of in-state natural gas or out-of-state fossil, which is gas and coal. And so that means that during those times, those power plants are not generating revenue. They're expected to just sit. And yet you see this massive, nearly 90% increase when you shift to the summer of this year, and you have real problems. Some of them are transmission, but the problems are kind of built into a system that is more and more intermittent with more and more renewables. And these are issues that people in Utah certainly are going to need to pay attention to, and throughout the West, and frankly, throughout the country. We see very similar circumstances in Texas, but not with the import-export situation, but just with the intermittence of wind generation. And it is a brewing storm as well. We don't have time to get into that situation, but the slides will tell you both the Department of Energy's observations and the Reliability Council's observations in the Texas market. So I'm going to go back to, since we just teed up this question of renewable energy and understanding the grid better, I don't know if we have time for 2 videos, so I'm going to just start with one and we'll see where we're at. This first video, and again, I'm going back to this series of basic educational videos that the group Life Powered at lifepowered.org has created. And there's more than these videos on that website, and I encourage all of that content because it's just really solid, substantively strong, and yet accessible to the general public. But this series of animated videos that are basic education are appropriate for any audience, young and old, and would really improve the public dialogue about electricity-driven policies. So the first I'm going to show, and hopefully they're just 2 3-minute videos, so hopefully we have time to show 2 because I think it rounds out the story quite well, is this Energy 101 video about the grid just generally, just getting people to dead level understanding of where does electricity come from without really getting into any of the technical details that we kind of flesh out in subsequent videos. So I'm going to go ahead and act like I'm in control of things and start it up.
The electric grid. It's the vast interconnected system that powers our modern lives. Electricity generated at a power plant travels through transmission lines, often spanning hundreds of miles. Once arriving at a local distribution system, it's routed through smaller lines that run directly into our homes and businesses. Each part of the electric grid is synchronized, functioning like a giant electrical machine where all parts are constantly communicating and working together. The supply of electricity can be turned up or down to meet the variable demands of our communities. But how do our power plants generate this electricity? Most of our electricity comes from large turbines that spin generators to create current. These turbines are powered by steam, created by heating water with natural gas, coal, and nuclear fission. We also spin turbines with water at hydroelectric dams, as well as quick-start jet engines and large engines like those used in marine vessels. Renewable energy, a growing part of our energy mix, comes primarily from wind farms and solar panels. These sources are not part of the synchronized grid, but instead contribute electricity intermittently. If there's no sun, like on rainy days or at night, or no wind blowing, other sources on the grid are required to ensure a constant flow of electricity. Battery technology is advancing to fill some of the gap, but physical constraints and economics make it impossible to displace the need for natural gas, coal, and nuclear power on our ever more interconnected lives.
All right, so I'm going to go back to this main screen. Hopefully it works. Yeah, so you see what we're trying to do there is we're just trying to get everybody to understand, hey, how does the grid work? And we're not taking a shot at renewable energy. It's just very important that the physics of that connection and the intermittence issue be addressed. So this series of videos builds on each other. So once you've watched the first and the second, you understand more about the grid. So we actually start getting into some things that are a little bit more detailed, but still very high level for those that deal with these issues every day anyway. And so I'm going to show one more just because we have limited time. I definitely encourage the entire series to everybody. Lifepower.org, you can use those, send them out to everybody. And really, unless every American, frankly, sees this stuff, we can't really expect folks to make smart decisions, whether they be in city council and state legislators or legislatures or in Congress. So please do what you can to spread the word on communication and education. So I'm going to move to this energy density video because it really comes right off the back of this understanding of the grid and helps people get a little bit better appreciation for what we're heading into as we go to a deeper I think I clicked the wrong thing. As we get a deeper penetration of renewable energy, what kind of things we might need to be dealing with and how it causes problems. So hopefully this works out good.
Where do we get the fuel we burn that powers our electric grid? Millions of years ago, plants absorbed the sun's energy. When they died, they were eventually buried under the surface. Under the Earth's immense heat and pressure over millions of years, the stored solar energy intensified, resulting in a set of energy-dense fuels like natural gas and coal. We use a wide range of technologies to locate, access, and bring these fuels to the surface. These fuels are then transported through pipelines, railways, and rivers, where they are processed and used in our power plants.
Well, classic, I had to fit in with the technical difficulties. I showed a different video than I thought, but we're going to go to the video that I introduced now. That's an important building block because obviously it tells you a little bit about where we get the coal and natural gas. But now we talk about energy density and what it means to the larger grid when you factor in renewable energy penetration. So this should be, I'm going to click on this right here. Well, maybe I'll have to start show again. Uh-oh, I just messed up. All right, so here's what we're gonna do. Go watch the videos, lifepower.org. If you just like to Google and search things up on YouTube, Life Powered Energy 101, they're all worthwhile. I'd sit here and play videos all day if I had the chance. So I'm gonna hand it over to Brian because we wanna get you back to your days and make sure we honor your schedule. So thanks for being here. Appreciate the opportunity to be here, Brian. Thanks again. Take care.
Okay. We appreciate all of our presenters. We had originally planned to do some Q&A, but because of some technical difficulties and other things, we're a little bit behind schedule and we want to get back on as much as we can. So I want to thank Katie and Kevin and Ron and Mike for their willingness to participate in in this technical session today. So right now we're going to take a 5-minute break. And we'll be back on this live stream channel in just a few minutes for another short general session where we're going to give out some awards and have some agency updates, and then we'll transition after that to the final breakout sessions. So we'll be back here in about 5 minutes. Thank you.